Our guest this morning is Greg Burchett. Greg, I want to make sure you're on the mic and we can hear you okay.
Good morning.
Yeah, keep close to that mic for me if you
you.
would. And volume-wise, April, we okay so you can hear? Excellent, yeah. Greg is a biology and health services professor at Riverside City College, if I have that correct. And I don't know how else to say this, but roughly 4 years ago, his wife struck and stabbed to death, I guess, his 17-month-old son, and resulting in his death. And Greg is here to talk about that experience. He's got a new book out that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And Greg, I'm just sorry we're even having this conversation, but I do appreciate your coming in. You and I met earlier in the week here in Laguna, and we spent probably 2 hours, and you and I connected immediately on some level. I'm not even really sure why. But,
neither do I. You
Yeah.
know, after meeting you, I just wasn't, drive home. I wasn't quite sure how I came to like you,
Yeah.
but I did. So
Yeah.
We all have that.
I am
Yeah.
so glad to be here, and the work with the Friendship Shelter. I mean, these are big issues, and that's why I'm here. I just
Yeah.
want to help in any way I can.
That sounds
And I
great.
appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. So I don't know how to get into this story, but to just get into this story. And there were some signs early on, I guess, that perhaps your wife was suffering from potentially postpartum depression or psychoses. You sort of had witnessed some of those behaviors. She was quoted at one point as saying that, "It's okay, I set him, your son, free. God told me to do it." And I'm wondering if you can just sort of describe some of the signs you were noticing in your wife that led you to believe there was a problem there.
Well, to be honest, everybody has issues, and especially for a lot of women who have a child. Emotionally, psychologically, they go through ups and downs.
Right.
There's no question about that. And when it came to Lori and what happened in our lives, nothing possibly could have made me believe that any of my children are ever in harm's way.
Right.
She definitely had some psychological issues, and she was trying to find peace in herself. I fully expected her to do something, like shave her head and move to India or something like that.
Right.
But never in a million years would I thought that she would have hurt one of our kids. And she kept a lot of that hidden. A lot. I discovered later on through a lot of the writings on our computer of what she was actually thinking.
So the title of the book, by the way, is called Missing the Links. And the subtitle of this book is?
A Mother's Murder of My 17-month-old son, Garrison.
Yeah. And I have a card here that you gave me. The book is available online, Amazon, etc. People who are interested in hearing about your story can certainly go out and purchase this book for themselves. There were signs early on, about a week before this incident, or the weekend before this incident. I think in your book you described something that happened that was unusual.
Yeah.
Can you kind of describe for us what happened that sort of, looking back?
Yeah, it was like my experiences were taking a downward spiral, and the last 2 weeks were pretty bad. And about 10 days prior, I came home one evening from work, and if you've ever seen those movies of like a quote-unquote psycho killer and writing all over the walls, just gibberish everywhere.
Right.
She had like a children's art easel with the paper that drapes over it. It was about 3 feet wide, and it was about 8 or 10 feet long, and she had it draped over the kitchen table, and that's exactly what it was. Thousands of words all over this thing, and the infinity sign over and over and over all over this thing. And when I came home, it was like a surreal experience. She was trying to impart on me that she had discovered the secrets of the universe, and I did not give her the reaction that she expected, and she got very angry that night. And I remember she grabbed this thing and held it to her chest, and she said, "I will never talk to you about this again. You can't possibly understand where I'm at." And that was a very odd experience. And there were other things, but then the weekend before, one thing in particular, she took a drive with my stepson and her son, Nick, and with Garrison, and she came home and she said that I ran into a telephone pole with a car, and I ran outside. Are you okay? Everything's fine. I ran outside. there was no evidence that she ran into a pole. But she said that God had told her that if she would run into a telephone pole, if she believed, he would protect her. And there was some damage to some tires. It was like she hit a curb or something. But at that moment, a vehicle was a weapon. She definitely was not thinking straight. I wish I would have called 911, perhaps a 5150. She would have been under some observation for a while.
Right.
Garrison may not have died that day. I don't know what would have happened in the future.
Right.
But I do know, had I done that, had she gotten out, she probably would have taken my sons from me. She had threatened to do that before.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't thinking straight. I was emotionally exhausted, and I didn't realize the gravity of that situation.
Yeah. You talk about in your book coming home from work on the day of this incident, and your stepson was sitting on the couch, and you walked into the home with your son.
Yes.
And can you kind of walk us through just a little bit of that experience that you describe in your book?
Yeah. It was a Sunday night. She had come home from, she had tried to do some serious shopping that day. A lot of detail. Anyway, she was not in a bad place, and we had a slight argument that night, and she wanted Gregory and Garrison and Nick to all be home on that Monday. Nick was supposed to go back to school. He was in high school, and so that morning, I decided to take Gregory to daycare at RCC. So I get up, I'm getting dressed. It was about 5 in the morning, and Garrison woke up. And I took him out with me, gave him a little breakfast, stuff like that. And as I was getting ready to leave, I took him back to his mother. And I set him down, and he started crying. And she started screaming at me, "You made him cry. It's your ego. Made him cry. How dare you do that?" And as I left, she was laying on the bed with, I believe her arm was over her eyes, and she was chanting something. She was mumbling. I just thought she was just livid with me for whatever reason. I just left.
Right.
During the day, called multiple times, never got a hold of her. So I come home, as I normally would, and Nick was sitting on the couch in the living room, and he was very upset, very quiet. And I remember asking, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "Mom's in a bad place. It just has not been a good day." The gist of what he was trying to say. So I made some dinner. Him and Gregory are eating. I did not have an appetite. I said, "I'm going to go back and talk to your mom." He goes, "Don't do that. She asked not to be disturbed." And I did something I'd never done before. I said, "I'm out of here."
Right.
And I went and saw a movie. And afterwards, I went to a Starbucks. I had some coffee, just sat there until they closed. It was about 10 o'clock, and then I come home. And I thought, well, maybe everybody would be asleep. Come home, Nick and Gregory are still on the couch in the same place. And I walk in, I go, "What are you guys doing up?" And Nick said, he goes, "Man, something bad happened." And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I think Mom hurt Garrison." And I said, "What do you mean?" And "I think Mom killed Garrison." And I took off and went down the hallway, and all I remember is Nick saying, "Please don't hurt my mom. Please don't hurt my mom." And I went into the bedroom, and it was pretty dark, and I turned on a light, and there was blood on the floor. I found Garrison's body in the bed. And I went up, and I remember I touched his chest with my hand, and it was cold like a table.
Wow.
And it was kind of a surreal experience, and I remember thinking to myself, this is a murder scene, don't touch anything. And that was a regret I had. I didn't pick my son up. I didn't hug him. And so I went to the bathroom, and the door was locked, and the light was out. And I banged on the door. Nothing. And you can hear the shower running. To be honest, I thought that she had killed herself. And I remember thinking, I got to get this door open. I'm going to kick it down. But if I do that, I got to fix it. So I got a little screwdriver, and I picked the lock. It was like a zombie. I was just kind of walking. Open the door, turn on the light, and I screamed, "Lori," and there was nothing. But then I saw her hand hit the shower door. And at that moment, I knew she was alive. And I opened the shower door and I looked at her, and she was sitting there in pure cold water, just sitting there. And if you saw the booking photo, that face was the face she had, and I didn't recognize her.
You say that in your book, you didn't recognize her.
Yeah, I didn't. That wasn't my wife. I didn't recognize her face.
Right.
And I said, "What happened?" And she just stared at me with those cold eyes, and she basically slid the shower door right in front of me, just like she just cut me off. And at that moment, I was fearful of my kids.
Sure.
I was afraid she was going to come out. I was ready to go to war, and I had a split-second thought. I knew where my shotgun was, and I'm going to blow her head off. But I didn't, and I thought, I just got to get the kids. Nick was crying, Gregory was crying. I put him into a bedroom, and that's basically when I called for help.
You know, after this tragic incident, you were handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. I believe they sort of took you in for questioning at the time. Your 2 boys had been taken away. Your 1 son had died. Your wife was being taken away. And in the book, and I'll mention the title again, Missing the Links, you write about this process you went through after this event. You use the terms evisceration and emasculation. And I'm wondering what you mean by those terms and how they're applicable here.
Well, the term evisceration at its basic context is when you slaughter an animal and you remove its intestines and everything like that. I used the term as an analogy for emotionally, I felt I was eviscerated. My whole life was ripped away from me. Emasculation, again, is another term where a male is castrated. And I felt that my life, I had lost all control. I had lost my son. My life was ripped apart, and I perhaps lost my manhood. My life was out of my control for quite a while, and it took, and that's why I use those analogies to show a bigger. I was trying to explain where I was emotionally. Yeah,
you had to go through media attention, national, international media attention. You had to eventually go through the trial, and I believe, if I got this right, the defense counsel claims that perhaps you didn't see the signs. And I'm wondering, when you heard that by the defense counsel, if that's indeed what he or she said, what was your reaction?
Well, their job is to diffuse blame on her. And so insanity was a central part of it. Matter of fact, they brought in the psychiatrist and other medical that worked on Andrea Yates's case. It was a very big profile case. But they did try to put some blame on me that I should have gotten help. And that's their job. But it hurt me in that, I was already blaming myself. And now it's, it's a part of their defensive strategy. So they couldn't blame me worse than I blamed myself.
At what point did you put it together that perhaps, or did you immediately put it together that the reason your wife did what she did was because of some sort of psychosis she was experiencing?
I think it was afterwards when I was getting therapy for Gregory, and I met professionals that dealt with, I never really understood postpartum stress, postpartum psychosis, and the more I learned about it, the more it seemed to make sense that that's what she was experiencing. And this is also one of the reasons I've become such a big advocate for women's mental health. It's not just for the woman, it's for the children and the families, and the importance of the families all working together to help the woman get through perhaps a difficult time in her life.
Yeah. You talk in your book, Greg, about various themes that Lori goes through or went through at the time. You mentioned anger, loss of control, neuroticism, and godly conversations. And you say here she had an awakening during a yoga class. And before we get to that, I want to make sure that we still have, is Lisa on the phone? Lisa, are you there?
I'm there.
Okay, April, let's get Lisa on the phone if we can and make sure she can hear what we're talking about. But the emotional kind of themes she went through, can you just speak briefly to those?
Well, yeah, she, we were both attending yoga classes, but she was at a class one time, and evidently during the class, one of the conversations that was had, it really hit her emotionally. And she had to excuse herself from the class for a few minutes. And she referred to it as an awakening, how she really spiritually just grew at that moment. And she tried to explain it to me, but I had a hard time understanding a lot of times what her thought process was. And it's not yoga's blame. It just was an experience that she had. But she referred to it as an awakening, and I think that day changed her life, and she went down a completely different pathway. Yeah.
Lisa, are you on? Can we hear you, Lisa, or can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thank you for calling in. This is Lisa Dryan. She's a licensed therapist and chair of the Inland Empire Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative, which helps women in their mental health issues and their families after pregnancy or during and after pregnancy. And Lisa, you're familiar with Greg and with Greg's tragic scenario, yes?
I am very familiar.
Yeah. And I don't know that you can speak necessarily to the specific behaviors of his wife, but, what sort of behaviors do women who sort of suffer from this postpartum depression or psychosis, what sort of behaviors are typically exhibited?
Well, one of the things I want to make clear is that, Lori Burchett was never diagnosed with maternal mental health disorder. And that's how we like to phrase it rather than postpartum depression, which is kind of bantered about. But if you're only talking about depression, most women won't identify it when they won't bring themselves in for treatment because they're not depressed. They may be anxious or they may be even psychotic, and it's very different. So we really like to use the phrase maternal mental health disorders. But Lori was never diagnosed with anything, but a lot of her symptoms suggested that this may have been what she was, experiencing. And for some women, the time before and after pregnancy is very challenging, and though postpartum psychosis is extremely rare, and we don't want to frighten people because only 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 women who give birth will experience postpartum psychosis, and of that, even fewer are going to go on to commit homicide, or more likely they're going to commit suicide. But it's still very serious, and we're very concerned that it goes unassessed. One of the problems with it is that even though it has an incident rate of between 10 to 20% of women are going to have a maternal mental health disorder. Most physicians, OBGYNs, the family practice doctors, and pediatricians don't do a formal assessment. They'll usually say, how are you feeling? And women will say, fine, and that's the assessment, and they go out the door. And I don't know what happened in Lori's case, but it would have been so much better if there were services available to her that really are not available in every community. And if the doctors had formal assessment tools in the office that they were using and utilizing for every woman who came through the door.
For the mothers or the listeners out there who may be exhibiting some of these behaviors, what would you suggest they do? How do they go about getting help?
Well, I'll give you some real good information. There is a really good program. First off, internationally, there is a program called Postpartum Support International, and they've been working with women on this problem since the mid-1970s, and they have a warm line, which women can get to if they go to www.postpartum.net. And it's a really lovely nonprofit focused on women. You'll look at the signs and symptoms. They can also go to our website at www.iepmhc.org, where we list off what are the symptoms of postpartum depression, anxiety, and psychosis. And we'll give you resources that are available in Riverside County, but actually, and it's only Riverside, it's not even in the whole county. San Bernardino doesn't have the resources that we have. Due to funding. But in Orange County, I want to make sure people have the phone number for St. Joseph's Hospital, because they do have a program called Caring for Women with Maternal Depression, and their phone number is 714-771-8101. But, they're like all of us, we're always at risk of losing our funding. Right now, I'm very grateful to the Kaiser Community Foundation of Riverside, as well as the United Way of the Inland Valleys, that have provided me with funding that gives me I'm able to treat 5 women in our mental health clinic at the Wiley Center, where the Perinatal Collaborative operates. But most communities don't have this. San Diego doesn't have something like this, and neither does Orange County.
Yeah,
but St. Joseph's is a really great program that women should link up to.
Greg, let me ask you, your wife was eventually found guilty of first-degree murder and assault of a child resulting in injury or death. She was sentenced to 25 years to life, and she was found to be not psychologically impaired at the time of the murder. And what's your reaction to sort of...
Well, it took me a while to wrap my head around criminal insanity versus medical insanity. And there are definite criteria for a person that must match all the criteria to be found criminally insane. And I think the easiest way for me to understand it is if somebody at a point does not understand what their actions are or the ramifications, that's a big part of criminal insanity. And in this case, she knew that what she was doing, she probably was going to get in trouble, but she knew there were ramifications. And so
and we talked a little bit about this as well, and that is, I asked you last week what your relationship is like with your ex-wife these days, and I think you said it was non-existent, but you did describe a moment where you brought your son in to see your wife in prison. And would you be okay sharing that with us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It and it went against my core, but people that I trusted said that in Gregory's best interest, he needed to see his mother, and so, I'll make it brief. But Gregory had not seen his mother in 2 years, and I took him to see her at the jail, and this was the week of her, the week of her sentencing, and. She comes in behind the glass partition. He didn't even recognize her at first. But then when we sat there and we had to talk through phones, it was very quiet. He had his head down and he was picking at his fingers. And after a few minutes, I asked him, would you like to say something? And he said, yes. And he looks up at her and he goes, why did you kill my baby Garrison? This was a 4-5-year-old boy at the time who did the bravest thing I think I've ever witnessed in my life, to stand up to his mother and say that. And a few minutes later, the second thing he said to her is, I am very angry at you. And at that moment I knew that the suggestion I take him, it was the perfect thing to do. And I didn't tell anyone before I was going to do it, because I knew that everyone would say, what the hell are you thinking of?
Everyone would have an opinion.
But when we walked out, it was like he had this weight taken off his little shoulders, and he really, he needed to do that. Kids are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. They often just don't have the communication tools. Heck, adults don't half the time.
How is he doing today, and how are you doing, and how are you doing together?
Gregory is wonderful. He's excelling in school. He has good friends. He's just a normal little 8-year-old boy. He's going to be turning 9 this year. Can't believe it's been this long. It's been well over half his lifetime. He hasn't had his mother in his life. Yeah, but he's really doing well. I've got friends and family. I'm engaged.
Are you?
And Brittany has absolutely reinstilled, I believe, Gregory's faith in a woman and as a mother figure. And I think that there is just so much good. And I want everyone to understand my story is very rare, but a lot of my experiences everybody can share. And I think there's always got to be optimism. And as long as we understand a little bit about what family dynamics are and what women go through, it's up to the man, it's up to the families and the friends to also step up and help a woman get through some trying times. And if we do that, we can alleviate or avert this. And if we can get out and get the word out, like what you guys were saying earlier, how much money is spent in hospitals and incarceration when some of that money could be just used for basic treatment and be a lot more cost efficient medically, if we could provide some basic services, who knows how many lives that we could touch.
Greg, you've exhibited a tremendous amount of strength here this morning, and I appreciate that. And I'm also apologetic for asking you to come in and share your story with us, but thank you for doing that. This is Greg Burchett, by the way. The title of his book is Missing the Links, A Mother's Murder of My 17-Month-Old Son, Garrison.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you. You've been listening to KX 93.5, Laguna's only FM.